Hello everyone and welcome to Plot Twists. I just wanted to show off the coolest thing I got sent this week. My friend Alyssa is learning to embroider and she sent me this for Christmas. How cute is this? My first bit of fan art. I just wanted to point out how amazing it is and how excited I am to have it. So look forward to seeing this on my shelves in future videos. So continuing on today I'm going to be doing my top 10 books of 2020. This will include anything that I finished from January 1st of this year through yesterday. And I actually did have more 5-star reads than 10 books. So there are a couple of 5-star reads that are not included, even though they were incredible. I'm only going to talk about the 10 that I liked the most. So without further ado, let's get started. My first 5-star read of 2020 was Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the last book in the Folk of Air trilogy. This series centers around Jude, who is a human girl living in the Fae world. When she's 7, her parents are murdered by her older half-sister's father, who is Fae. Her sister is half Fae. And he steals Jude and her twin sister Taryn away to the Fae world to live because he has honor or something. And this story centers around her kind of coming of age and trying to figure out where her place is in the Fae world and how to forge a place for herself. She has a very different idea than her twin sister Taryn of how they want to fit into this world. I really enjoyed this conclusion. It very much centers around that like enemies to lovers trope. And I know that that's hit or miss for some people, but that in this particular setting for me, I really, really enjoyed it. Jude is a really interesting and dynamic character who I think changes a considerable amount between where she starts and where she ends. She's a very independent female character, which I still think is somewhat rare in books. She doesn't really rely on anybody else. And she very much is passionate about taking care of her family, and I think that's really cool as well. Overall, I loved this series. I think it's fairly rare that I enjoyed the last book in a series as much as the first, and in this series, that's definitely true. So, if you haven't picked up the Folk of Air trilogy, I would recommend it for sure. The second 5-star read that I read in 2020 was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This book is such an interesting and unique concept. So it takes the, contest trope of trying to win an ungodly amount of money, and I think it does it in a really interesting and unique way. This centers around our main character, Wade, who is an extremely poor teenager. He lives with his aunt who really doesn't want him after his parents die, and he is trying to win the fortune of a video game tech mogul in the society who has created all of these incredible things. VR technology basically revolutionized the tech world. So when this tech mogul passes away, he sets up this contest because he has no heir to live on and nobody he wants to leave the money to. So basically he says, if you can solve these puzzles and find the end, my fortune is yours. As a result, in this society, there are companies, entire companies that have set up trying to win this guy's money. And for years, people have been trying to figure this out to no avail. And then one day, Wade manages to crack the first code, and then it kind of just bursts open everybody's ability to figure out the rest of it. while the movie is also really good, I think I enjoyed the book even more. One of the things that the movie leads out is the first task it completely changes. And I understand in the context of the movie why they would change it, because watching that race was really interesting. And I don't think it would have been as interesting to read. But the first task in the book actually centers around a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon, and a very iconic one. And I thought that was a really cool way to kind of work in more of that like 80s lore, whereas like a race doesn't necessarily, you know? And that, speaking of the 80s lore, that was one of my favorite things about this book. The number of 80s references to games, movies, whatever, and the fact that the main character has spent so much of his life studying this tech mogul's favorite things to try to figure out what the clues to the puzzle might be. It's incredible. One of the other things I really enjoyed about this book is the plot twists involving H. I won't spoil it in case you guys haven't read it, but figuring out who H really is, one, was a huge surprise for me, and two, was so cool. Yeah, if you haven't picked this one up, I would highly recommend it. It's definitely not in my typical wheelhouse, but it's so good. Moving on to my next 5-star read, you guys know I've been working my way through the Twisted Tales series that Disney has put out. This year I read So This Is Love, and I think this is my favorite of the series so far. Not a huge Cinderella fan necessarily, but the plot twist that this story took and the direction it changes, in conjunction with seeing Cinderella in a more YA grittier format, was really cool. So the premise of this book is, what if Cinderella never tried on the glass slipper? So this book starts with that, and the glass slipper shatters, or the one she has, so she can't prove that, you know, it would have fit on her foot. And the story kind of takes place from there. She runs away from her stepmother and stepsisters, and ends up at the palace, and ends up as a like attendant for the prince's aunt, the king's sister, who apparently is very picky and has run away a bunch of different attendants. But because Cinderella isn't like a typical palace attendant, I think it works really well. The story is really interesting and unique. The way that Cinderella kind of develops character, whereas she doesn't nearly as much in the Disney movie. She starts as a very kind, like, righteous character and ends in the same manner. There's a lot of character development in this that you don't get in the first one, and I think that was really enjoyable to read as well. If you're looking for a place to start with the Disney Twisted Tales books, I would recommend starting here. So my next 5-star read for this year was an audiobook. I listened to Landlines by Rowell. This is probably the best romance novel. That's dramatic. Probably one of the best romance novels I've ever read. The basic premise of this book starts with these two characters. The basic premise starts with these two characters, Georgie and Neil. And they are married and have 2 daughters, and their marriage is starting to crumble because of Georgie's choices with her career. And she's supposed to go home with Neil to visit his mother and his parents for Christmas. And because she finally gets her big break making her own TV series, she's a TV writer. She decides not to go home with him for, you know, the winter holiday, and she can feel her marriage crumbling. Neil no longer responds to her phone calls, and things really are headed downhill. She decides to, because her cell phone is dead, she decides to call him on her mother's landline phone. She had gone over for dinner that night, and he picks up the phone, but there's something kind of off about their phone call, and she can't quite place what it is. As the story progresses, you figure out kind of why the phone calls with Neil on the landline are different, and where the story ends up kind of fills in a gap for Georgie that she didn't understand previously. And where the story goes is incredible. By that last scene, I was in tears. It was so powerful, and so much character development as you watch Georgie kind of figure out, you know, the importance of her marriage and how to fix it, what she needs to do, and it's impeccable. This is definitely the book that had me like sold on reading all of Rainbow Rowell stuff. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Overall, it was a really amazing read. My next 5-star read this year was Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. Robert Jackson Bennett was a new author for me this year, and I have now read 4 of his novels. As soon as Shorefall comes out in a paperback, I will have that as well. And to be honest, I did some Barnes & Noble shopping this weekend, and if they had Foundry Side, even in a hardcover, I probably would have picked it up anyway. Foundry Side is set in a world in which there's kind of this like rune magic where you draw these glyphs, and they can enchant objects to be magical. It can convince wheels that they need to continuously turn as if they were turning downhill, even if they're going uphill. It can convince doors that only certain people can enter, that kind of stuff. The main character is a thief in this world, and a pretty good thief, and she is commissioned at the beginning of the book to steal an item that will pay her enough money to get a surgery that she wants, that she needs because of some past horrific events. But when she steals this item, she learns that it's a key, and the key can talk to her, and it's wild. The key kind of explains to her more about how these glyphs work, and the key can get around some of the glyphs to allow her to access places she wouldn't have been able to previously, and that kind of stuff. So she ends up meeting a whole ragtag group of characters, and they are on a quest to kind of stop an evildoer in this society. Overall, the world that's built here is really thought out and incredible. There are 4 kind of factions, 4 sections of the city in this world, and they're all based on different businesses. And then you have Foundry Side, which is where all of the people who don't belong to one of the businesses live. You're poor, you're struggling people, and there's not really anyone in the society who cares whether they live or die. Until the main character meets somebody who does, and that's another important plot point. Overall, the series, this particular book was incredible. Can't wait to read the sequel. Can't wait to see where it's going. And Robert Jackson Bennett is easily one of my favorite new authors of 2020. So, pick up Foundry Side. The next book that I want to talk about is also by Robert Jackson Bennett. It is City of Miracles, which is the 3rd book in the Divine Cities trilogy. This series starts with City of Stairs, and it centers around a society in which there are these gods that have kind of... The city centers around a society where there are these gods that are responsible for the magic that takes place on a particular continent. As the magic grows, the continent breaches out, and they start taking over neighboring islands. Eventually, one of those islands rises up against them, and kills off all the gods in this particular land. So the magic is gone. They are very much, the continent is now colonized. They're not allowed to like worship the previous gods. They're not allowed to have any magic. There really aren't any more magical artifacts in the society. And the story starts with Shara Comaid, who is a like a secret operative for the island nation that has taken over the continent. And she is sent to the continent, well, sent is a little dramatic. She shows up at the continent because a prominent professor who was studying these gods is murdered. And it starts with her trying to figure out who the murderer is. And that's the central plot point of the first book. As the series progresses, and that's the central plot point of the first book. What's really interesting about this series is while that's the central premise, a good portion of the book is also figuring out the past of the continent and, you know, how the different gods worked, what they worshipped, what kind of happened to them, and, you know, moving through, there's some interesting stuff that happens with that. The other thing I really liked about this series is that when a character is introduced in a book, like a very prominent character, that's who the next book centers around. So the first book centers around Shara Comaid. Shara Comaid meets Turian Mulagash, who is an army soldier for the same island nation that she works for. The second book centers around Turian Mulagash. But the last book, City of Miracles, the one that I really appreciated, centers around Sigurd Hurkvaldsson, who is Shara Comaid's like right-hand man. As the series progresses, he ends up in a really unfavorable position by the third book, and this is about him kind of sort of trying to work through that. This was such a powerful ending to this series. The end easily had me in tears. Sigurd is a really strong character who I think develops probably the most across the series. Where he starts and where he ends is very different. And the realizations you watch him come to are incredible. If you haven't read anything by Robert Jackson Bennett, City of Stairs is definitely a good place to start. And I can, in my opinion, assure you that the series not only stays strong throughout it, but I think in terms of the series, I would say that the third book is even better than the first. Which I honestly can't think of another series I would say that about, where the ending is better than the beginning. You know, when you're introduced to a new world, you guys know, the first book is almost always one of the best, but in this particular series, where it ends up is better than where it starts. Highly recommend. In a surprising plot twist of 2020, the Hocus Pocus sequel is easily one of my favorite books of 2020. This book picks up where the movie ends. And if you haven't seen the movie, the good thing about this particular book is that it has a direct novelization of the movie. Almost point for point. Nothing is changed. And that's the first half of this. The second half is the new sequel, which centers around Allison and Max's daughter and two of her friends. This book has multiple main characters of color. This book has multiple LGBTQ characters. And the way this book goes about it in comparison to a lot of books is it doesn't try to make that a main focus. And what I mean by that is the author isn't like, oh, you know, the main character's best friend is black. It works it in by explaining that, you know, in the book it's Halloween, obviously. And his costume is that he's the first black president or another black president. And that's it's just the way that it works in this stuff is very normalized, like it should be. And I think that was really, really wonderful to read. The plot of the story, I mean, Hocus Pocus is great. Where this goes is, I mean, kind of where I would expect it to go in terms of the Sanderson sisters coming back, like they have to, because otherwise is it really Hocus Pocus? And then the, plot to save her parents and her Aunt Danny, the same three main characters from the first movie. But the character development that happens across it is really strong. The characters are really strong. And I really like that, there's a lot of diversity in this book that I really, really wasn't expecting. And the way it's written is really good. Overall, I would say that this was a great Halloween read, and I would highly recommend it. Next is a very expected love of 2020. Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. When this was recommended to me, the description I was given, I knew this book would be right up my alley. This book is basically a Harry Potter retelling, specifically a fan fiction. And that's exactly how it reads. It is so easy to get through. The characters are dynamic and interesting. There are some plot twists that you might see coming, but I didn't, and that was really incredible. And then where the book ends, the way it kind of differentiates from the Harry Potter formula, I think is really interesting and unique. Overall, this book is amazing. I did not quite like the second one as much as I did the first, but I know that there's a third book coming out, and I like where the second book ended and where the third one might pick up. So I guess we'll have to see. But overall, this book was very good, exactly as expected. Following up with one of my favorite fairy tale retellings ever, The Evil Queen by Gena Showalter. This takes the fairy tale formula and definitely twists it in a way that is both true to the source material, but unique and really interesting. One of the things that the story centers around is the idea of trying to figure out which characters Everly meets, the main character, are which parts of the Snow White fairy tale. The book starts with an interesting description of the fairy tale itself, and then as the book goes on, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out, along with the main character, which characters fit which roles, and where it ends up, I think, is definitely unexpected. The conclusion that the main character comes to is really interesting and unique. And I think it definitely takes the fairy tale retelling genre and flips it on its head. Overall, this was a really incredible read. And if you're into fairy tale retellings, I would highly, highly recommend it. And along with most of the rest of BookTube, my last 5-star read of 2020 was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book is definitely a historical fantasy book, which I don't read a whole lot of historical fiction to begin with, but the way that this book describes it is really interesting and unique. This book centers around the main character of Addie LaRue, who in the beginning of the story is trying to escape a kind of forced marriage by her parents to somebody that she doesn't want to be with. Addie just wants to be independent and, travel and see the world. And she comes across this god that she prays to, who basically tells her, I can fix this for you. What he doesn't tell her is that when he, kind of fixes it for her, she is not able to be remembered by anyone else, and she's not allowed to tell anybody her name. So she lives like this for 400 years until she meets somebody that remembers her. And that's the whole plot of the book, is her you know, finding somebody that remembers her, actually being able to develop some sort of bond after 400 years, and kind of explaining to him her story and where she started. The romance in this novel is really good, interesting, unique, relatable, and seeing Addie LaRue through multiple eras, you know, multiple countries, multiple time periods, is really interesting, especially because she is a woman on her own, and the story starts in the 1600s in France. And hearing her descriptions, seeing what happens to her, knowing the historical context, it's a really, really enjoyable read. Overall, if you are one of the very few booktubers who has not picked this up, highly recommend it. This might be my #1 favorite read of 2020. I'm not sure. I read a lot of good books, but it's definitely up there. So those are the top 10 books that I read in 2020. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what some of your favorite reads of 2020 were, especially if they differ from some of mine. I'm always looking for new things to add to my TBR list. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. Starting in the new year, I'm going to try to post videos twice a week. Probably once, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then once on the weekends. Let me know if there's any particular videos you'd like to see, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Bye!